When 7-year-old Leo, a boy who barely came up to the waist of most adults, found himself in a dusty roadside convenience store during an armed robbery, he did not cower. He did not cry. Instead, when the desperate man with a gun turned his attention to the largest person in the room, a mountain of a man clad in leather and patches, Leo did the unthinkable. He stepped directly between the two, planting his small sneakers on the worn linoleum floor as if taking a stand for the entire world. That single, breathtaking act of courage, from a boy who had every reason to be terrified, set off a chain of events that would turn a harrowing afternoon into a legend, culminating a week later when 100 leather-clad angels descended upon his elementary school, not to cause trouble, but to deliver a message that would change his life, and their own, forever. The day had begun with the familiar, monotonous drone of a long ride. The asphalt shimmered under the relentless afternoon sun, a gray ribbon unfurling through endless fields of corn. For Marcus Thorne, known to his brothers as Cold Train, this was therapy. The rumble of his Harley-Davidson was a steady heartbeat that drowned out the ghosts of 1,000 fires. At 52, Cold Train was the president of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. He was built like the freight train he was named after, wide, solid, and seemingly immovable. His arms, etched with the stories of his life in ink, were thick as timber. A gray-streaked beard cascaded over the eagle emblem on his leather vest, and his eyes, set deep beneath a furrowed brow, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a man who had spent 30 years as a firefighter, the last decade of it as an arson investigator. He knew how to read the subtle signs of chaos before it erupted. He knew the smell of accelerants, the patterns of spalling concrete, and the look in a person's eyes right before they did something desperate. He had pulled off the highway for a bottle of water, the kind of simple act performed 1,000,000 times a day in 1,000 places just like this one. The store was a relic, a forgotten outpost of civilization on a lonely stretch of road. The sign outside flickered, buzzing like a captured fly. Inside, the air was a stale cocktail of cheap coffee, sugary syrup from the slushy machine, and the faint chemical scent of floor cleaner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, sickly light on the rows of candy and chips. It was quiet. The only other people were a young woman and her son standing by the slushy machine, and a bored-looking teenager behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. Cold Train gave a slight nod to the woman as he passed. She looked tired, the way young mothers often did, with faint lines of worry etched around her eyes. But she smiled softly at her son, who was watching the swirl of red and blue ice with rapt attention. The boy was small for his age, with a mop of unruly brown hair and eyes that seemed too big and too serious for his face. He was clutching a small superhero action figure in one hand, its plastic cape bent and frayed from countless battles. He was a whisper in a loud world. Cold Train grabbed a water from the cooler, the cold plastic a welcome shock against his warm hand. He was turning toward the counter when the bell over the door chimed, announcing a new arrival. And with that chime, the entire atmosphere of the store shifted. The man who entered was a bundle of raw, twitchy nerves. He wore a gray hoodie pulled low over his face and jeans that were ripped and dirty. It was not his clothes that set off the alarm in Cold Train's head. It was everything else. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted around the small space, not looking at anything but scanning everything. He was cataloging exits, cameras, people. His hand was jammed deep in the pocket of his hoodie, clutching something. A fine sheen of sweat coated his upper lip, despite the aggressive chill of the store's air conditioning. Cold Train had seen that look 100 times. It was the look of a cornered rat. It was the frantic energy of a man whose choices had dwindled down to one last, terrible option. His training, buried but never gone, surged to the surface. He did not move. He did not tense up. He simply became what he had been for 30 years, an observer, a reader of chaos. He mentally clocked the distance between himself and the man, between the man and the mother and child, between the man and the door. The geometry of violence was something he understood intimately. He placed his water on the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. He kept his body angled slightly, never turning his back on the newcomer. The teenage cashier finally looked up from his phone, oblivious. "Help you?" he asked, his voice cracking with adolescent indifference. The man in the hoodie did not answer. He took 2 more quick steps, closing the distance to the counter. And then he pulled his hand from his pocket. The gun was not large, but in the sterile, quiet store, it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. It was black and ugly and real. "The drawer," the man rasped, his voice a dry crackle of fear and adrenaline. "All of it. Now." Coltrane's blood went cold, a familiar, chilling sensation that preceded action. His past and present collided in that single, terrible moment. The firefighter who ran into danger and the biker who rode away from it were now one and the same. He saw the cashier's face drain of all color, his hands flying up in surrender. He saw the young mother gasp, a strangled little sound of pure terror, as she instinctively grabbed her son and pulled him behind her legs, trying to make him invisible. He saw her try to shield him, but the boy, Leo, did not want to be shielded. He peeked out from behind his mother's legs, his small face a mask of confusion and a startling flicker of something else: defiance. His gaze swept past the robber, past the gun, and landed squarely on Coltrane. In that moment, a silent, profound communication passed between the giant, leather-clad man and the small, 7-year-old boy. Leo's eyes were not pleading for help in the way a child should be. They were assessing. He saw the robber, a figure of chaotic, loud fear, and he saw Coltrane, a figure of immense, quiet power. He looked from one to the other, and in his young, innocent mind, he seemed to be weighing the 2 forces. The robber grew more agitated, waving the gun at the trembling cashier. "Hurry up, now, put it in the bag." Coltrane remained perfectly still. His every instinct screamed at him to act, to use his size and his training to end this. But he could not. The mother and child were too close. Any sudden move could get them hurt. He was a statue of contained force, his mind racing, calculating angles and possibilities, waiting for an opening. The robber, emboldened by the cashier's compliance, turned his attention to the rest of the store. His wild eyes fell on Coltrane. He saw the leather vest, the club patches, the sheer size of him. He saw a threat. Or maybe he saw another payday. "You too," the robber snarled, gesturing with the gun toward Coltrane. "Wallet, phone, on the counter." Coltrane did not flinch. He slowly, deliberately, reached for his back pocket. He was not afraid of the gun. He was afraid for the boy. He could feel the child's stare on him, a tangible weight. It was in that frozen second, with the robber's attention locked on him, that the world tilted on its axis. It happened so fast it was almost surreal. Leo, the small boy who had been hiding behind his mother, made a decision. With a resolve that defied his age, his size, and the sheer terror of the situation, he stepped out. He walked away from the safety of his mother's embrace and planted himself firmly on the grimy floor. He stood directly in the line between the barrel of the gun and Coltrane's chest. He did not say a word. He just stood there, a tiny, defiant sentinel in a superhero t-shirt, his little fists clenched at his sides. His chin was up. His big, serious eyes were locked on the robber. He had made his choice. He had chosen to protect the stranger. The entire store fell into a stunned, heart-stopping silence. The hum of the coolers seemed to roar. The robber froze, his arm outstretched, the gun aimed at a 7-year-old boy. The cashier stopped breathing. Leo's mother let out a choked sob, her hand flying to her mouth. Coltrane felt a jolt that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with awe. In all his years, in all the fires and all the fights, he had never seen anything like it. The raw, unfiltered courage of this tiny child was a force of nature. It was the purest thing he had ever witnessed. That awe was instantly replaced by a cold, protective fury that burned hotter than any fire he had ever fought. This could not happen. He would not let this boy's incredible bravery be his last act. The robber, his frayed nerves snapping, finally found his voice. "What are you doing? Get out of the way, kid!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He took an aggressive step toward Leo. That was the opening Coltrane had been waiting for. He moved. It was not the explosive charge of a younger man. It was the deliberate, unstoppable advance of a force that understood leverage and momentum. He did not run. He simply closed the distance in 3 long, ground-eating strides. He ignored the gun completely. He ignored the man holding it. His entire focus was on creating a wall. He put his body between the robber and Leo. He was so close now that he could smell the sour sweat of the man's fear. He loomed over him, a mountain of shadow and leather, eclipsing the fluorescent lights. The robber stumbled back a step, his eyes wide with shock. "Don't hurt him," Leo finally whispered from behind Coltrane's massive form. His voice was small, but it cut through the tension like a razor. Coltrane's voice, when it came, was the low rumble of an idling engine, a sound that vibrated in the robber's very bones. "The kid's right," he said, his eyes locked on the man's. He did not issue a threat. He did not make a demand. He simply stated a fact. "You're in our way." The simple plural pronoun, our, seemed to unhinge the robber. He was no longer just dealing with a lone biker. He was dealing with a unit, a team. A man and a boy who had, in the span of 30 seconds, become an unbreakable alliance. The robber's panic spiked. He was trapped between the counter and this immovable object of a man. His plan, so simple in his desperate mind, had shattered. He glanced wildly toward the door, but Coltrane subtly shifted his weight, blocking the path. "You're not going that way," Coltrane said, his voice still unnervingly calm. It was the voice he had used to talk panicked homeowners out of running back into a burning building. The voice that cut through hysteria with its sheer certainty. "Let's you and me talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," the robber yelled, trying to regain control. He waved the gun, but the gesture was weak, lacking conviction. The weapons seemed to have grown heavy in his hand. Behind them, unseen by the robber, the teenage cashier had his finger pressed firmly on the silent alarm button beneath the counter. He had been holding it down ever since the gun first appeared, his eyes wide with terror but his actions guided by a sudden, sharp clarity. Coltrane kept the robber's focus entirely on himself. "I think there is," he continued, taking another slow, deliberate half-step forward. He was hurting him now, using his physical presence to subtly guide the man away from the front of the store, away from Leo and his mother, pushing him back toward the aisles of chips and soda. "I see a man who's having a very bad day. I see a man who's made a bad choice, but it's not too late to stop making them." "Shut up, just shut up," the man screamed, his composure completely gone. He was falling apart, and Coltrane was orchestrating the collapse, carefully, piece by piece. From his vantage point, Coltrane could see the reflection in the curved security mirror mounted in the corner of the ceiling. He saw the red and blue lights as they flooded the parking lot, painting the front windows in silent, strobing flashes. They had arrived without sirens, a quiet, professional approach. The bell on the door did not chime. 2 police officers slipped in, weapons drawn, moving with a fluid, practiced grace. They fanned out, one going left, one right. The robber was still locked in a battle of wills with Coltrane, completely unaware that the game was already over. "It's over, son," Coltrane said, his voice softening just a fraction. He nodded his head slightly toward his left shoulder. "They're here." The robber's eyes followed the nod. He saw the first officer over Coltrane's shoulder. His face, which had been a mask of frantic rage, simply crumpled. It was the look of total and complete defeat. The tension went out of his shoulders. His arm went limp. The gun fell from his hand. It hit the linoleum floor with a loud, definitive clatter that echoed in the sudden, profound silence. It was the sound of the end. The officers moved in immediately. "Police! Get on the ground! Hands behind your back!" The commands were sharp, loud, and unnecessary. The man was already sinking to his knees, his shoulders slumped, a sob catching in his throat. It was over. Coltrane did not watch them cuff the man. His job was done. He turned around, his first and only thought for the boy. Leo was standing exactly where he had been, his mother now kneeling in front of him, her arms wrapped around him in a desperate, trembling hug. She was crying, deep, shuddering sobs of relief. An officer gently approached them, speaking in a low, soothing voice. "It's okay. You're safe now. Let's get you outside." Coltrane finally let out the breath he felt like he had been holding for an eternity. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a profound sense of awe. Another officer, this one with sergeant stripes on his sleeve, walked up to him. He looked from Coltrane to the scene on the security monitor behind the counter, which showed the entire event in grainy, black and white detail. "You're Marcus Thorne, right?" the sergeant asked. Coltrane was surprised the man knew his name. "I thought I recognized you. My dad was in the 105th with you. Sergeant Miller." Coltrane nodded, the name clicking into place. "I remember him. Good man." "He always said you were the calmest man he ever saw in a crisis," Miller said, a small smile touching his lips. He gestured to the monitor. "Guess he was right. You kept that guy's focus. You de-escalated. You probably saved lives in here today, Mr. Thorne. Most people would have frozen or tried to be a hero. You just handled it." "I didn't do much," Coltrane said, his voice rough. The boy was the one who did something." Sergeant Miller's expression softened. "Yeah," he said, his voice full of respect. "I saw that. I've been a cop for 15 years. Never seen anything like it." He clapped a hand on Coltrane's shoulder. "Thank you for your help." Outside, the air was cool and fresh. The world seemed strangely normal, a stark contrast to the condensed chaos of the last 10 minutes. Paramedics were checking on Leo and his mother, Sarah. She was holding a blanket around her shoulders, but her attention was fixed on her son, who seemed remarkably unfazed. As Coltrane walked out of the store, Leo saw him. The boy's face lit up. He wiggled out of his mother's grasp, and to everyone's surprise, marched directly over to the giant biker. He stopped a few feet away and looked up, his head tilted back. "You weren't scared," Leo stated. It was not a question. It was an observation from an expert. A slow smile spread across Coltrane's face, softening the hard lines of his features. He crouched down, a long, creaking process that brought him face to face with the boy. The top of Leo's head barely reached his shoulder even now. "Oh, I was scared," Coltrane admitted, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "I was terrified. But then I saw you. You were the bravest person in that whole store, you know that? Braver than me, braver than the police, braver than anyone." A wide, brilliant smile erupted on Leo's face, transforming his serious expression. He pointed a small finger at the patches on Coltrane's vest. "What are those?" Coltrane looked down at his colors. "The Iron Saints crest, the President patch, the memorial patches for fallen brothers." "This is my club," he explained. "The Iron Saints. We're a brotherhood. It means we look out for each other. We have each other's backs, no matter what." Leo's eyes were wide with fascination. "Like knights?" Coltrane chuckled. "Yeah, kid, exactly like knights." Sarah, Leo's mother, approached them, her eyes red-rimmed but full of a gratitude so immense it was overwhelming. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "What you did, and what he—" She looked at her son with a mixture of terror and fierce pride. "He's a special kid," Coltrane said simply. "He gets picked on at school sometimes," Sarah confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "For being small, for being quiet. I've been so worried about him. And then he does this." Her voice broke. An idea began to form in Coltrane's mind, a spark in the wake of the fire. He looked from the brave little boy to his worried mother, and then at the patch on his own vest. Brotherhood. Looking out for people. It wasn't just for the club. "What's his school?" Coltrane asked, his voice suddenly purposeful. Sarah told him the name, Northwood Elementary. Coltrane nodded slowly. He looked back down at Leo, who was still staring at his patches. "You know, Leo," he said, "sometimes even the bravest knights need their own army to ride with them." He made a silent promise to himself and to the boy. "We'll see you soon." The following Monday morning arrived with the crisp promise of a new week. At Northwood Elementary, children were being dropped off, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Teachers stood by the doors, greeting students. It was a picture of perfect, mundane normalcy. Then came the rumble. It started as a low, distant thunder, a vibration felt more than heard. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The rumble grew louder, deeper, multiplying. It was not one engine, it was many. Dozens. Over the rise of the hill, the first motorcycle appeared, its chrome glinting in the morning sun. It was followed by 2 more, then 10, then 20. They kept coming. One by one, a fleet of motorcycles descended on the quiet suburban school. They were not just Iron Saints. Coltrane had made calls. He had told the story. He had spoken of the courage of a 7-year-old boy who stood up to a gun to protect a stranger. The story had spread through the regional MC network like a wildfire of inspiration. The Stonebreakers were there. The Sons of Odin were there. The Road Regents were there. In total, just over 100 bikers pulled up to Northwood Elementary. They moved with a quiet, disciplined order that belied their intimidating appearance. They parked their bikes in neat rows along the curb, engines cutting out one by one, until the air was filled with a respectful silence, punctuated only by the ticking of cooling metal. The principal, a woman named Mistress Gable, rushed out, her face a mask of alarm. She was met by Coltrane, who had dismounted and removed his sunglasses. "Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "What is all this?" "We're not here for trouble, ma'am," Coltrane said, his voice calm and respectful. "We're here for Leo." He explained what had happened in the convenience store. He told her about the boy's impossible bravery. "A boy like that," he finished, "should never feel like he has to stand alone. Today, we're his honor guard." Mistress Gable's expression shifted from fear to astonishment, and then to a deep, profound understanding. Tears welled in her eyes. She simply nodded. The bikers, men of all ages and sizes, covered in leather and tattoos, formed two long, silent lines. They created a pathway, a corridor of respect, stretching from the edge of the parking lot all the way to the front doors of the school. A moment later, Sarah's minivan pulled up. She parked, her hands trembling on the steering wheel as she stared at the incredible sight. In the passenger seat, Leo looked out, his eyes wide. He saw the sea of black leather, the gleaming chrome, the stoic faces of 100 hardened men. He looked scared for a half second, his small frame shrinking back into his seat. Then he saw him. At the very front of the line, standing tall and waiting, was Coltrane. He caught Leo's eye and gave him a slow, warm smile. That was all it took. Leo's fear vanished, replaced by a dawning sense of wonder. He opened his door and got out. Coltrane walked over and knelt down, just as he had done outside the store. He held out his hand. In his palm was a small, custom-made patch. It was a perfect, miniature replica of the Iron Saint's crest, the noble eagle rendered in intricate thread. "This is for you," Coltrane said, his voice full of pride. "You showed us what true courage looks like. You reminded us what we're supposed to be about. By a unanimous vote of the Iron Saints and our allies, you're one of us now, an honorary saint." Leo stared at the patch, then back up at Coltrane, his eyes shining. He took the patch with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. "This is your army, Leo," Coltrane said, gesturing to the silent ranks of bikers. "This is your honor guard. Walk with your head up. You've earned it." Sarah was openly weeping now, her hand over her heart as she watched. Leo began to walk. He walked down the path created by the bikers. He clutched his new patch in his hand. As he passed, the bikers, these men who the world saw as outlaws and troublemakers, nodded to him. Their gruff, weathered faces broke into small, genuine smiles. "Morning, Leo," one grunted. "Way to be, little man," another said, tipping his head in respect. A group of older boys, the ones who had made Leo's life difficult, stood by the bike racks, their mouths hanging open in disbelief. They watched as the small, quiet boy they used to pick on was honored by 100 of the toughest-looking men they had ever seen. They watched him walk with a confidence he had never possessed before. Leo reached the school doors, where his principal was waiting with a tearful smile. He turned back and looked at the army of men standing silent sentinel. He looked at Coltrane, who gave him a final, proud nod. Leo smiled, a brilliant, confident smile, and then he disappeared into the school. The bikers did not leave immediately. They stayed for another 15 minutes, a silent, powerful presence that sent an unspoken message to everyone who saw them. This child is protected. This child is one of ours. That day changed everything. It changed the school, where bullying Leo became an unthinkable act. It changed the community, which saw the men in leather vests not as a threat, but as guardians. Most of all, it changed the Iron Saints. Inspired by Leo's courage and the profound impact of their simple act, Coltrane and the other club presidents started a new initiative. They called it the Saints' Shield. It was an anti-bullying program. They began visiting schools across the state, not to intimidate, but to mentor. They shared stories of courage, of standing up for the little guy, of the true meaning of brotherhood. They became a force for good, a visible reminder that strength is not for intimidation, but for protection. Years later, Coltrane would still get a Christmas card every year from Leo and Sarah. The first few had drawings of a little boy and a giant biker standing together. As Leo grew older, they became letters. He wrote about his friends, about joining the soccer team, about helping another kid who was being picked on. In his high school graduation photo, tucked into the pocket of his gown, you could just see the corner of a small, worn patch of an eagle. Coltrane often thought back to that day in the convenience store. He had faced down death many times in his life, but the single bravest act he had ever witnessed came from a 7-year-old boy in a superhero t-shirt. It was a reminder that changed the course of his life and the soul of his brotherhood. It taught them all that the measure of a knight is not the armor he wears or the horse he rides. It is the courage in his heart and his willingness to stand and shield the innocent, no matter how small or afraid he might be.